So we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm very glad to have you here for this event. This is our first hybrid event. So it's a remarkable moment because we start at Sciences Po. What an honor. My name is Anna, for those who do not know me yet. I am the resident philosopher at the AI Collective. And my mission is to host events that are impactful for the AI world, such as this one. If you want to know more about the work we are doing as resident philosophers at the AI Collective, you can check the last talks on our YouTube channel, the AI Collective. We have many talks with highly skilled and qualified speakers there, involving several topics such as AI companions and AIs that are developing emotional relationships with people, dependency, psychological effects of AI, children and adolescents using AI, and even AI in spirituality. There was an episode that was about AI apps in the realm of faith. So if you are interested, check on YouTube. Also, for those who do not know the AI Collective yet, this is a grassroots community founded in San Francisco that gathers today over 100,000 people worldwide, amongst innovators, builders of technology, researchers, people from the academia, and enthusiasts of AI. Our mission there is basically to raise awareness about AI because we believe that it's possible to have human flourishing alongside AI. So we bring awareness about AI impactful topics, and also we try to bring some interesting insights for people's lives in this post-AI era. Yes, I would also like to invite you to our upcoming event. The next event will be a fully online one, and it will be in 19th of March. This will be a very special event as well, because we will have the opportunity to interview the CEO of a very first-hand AI in the world. It's a social robot that basically is a plush embedded with AI for emotional support targeted at adults. So it's a very interesting technology. As you may know, many people around the world are already using AI for emotional support. And we have this first-hand interview with someone that built a technology such as this one. So it will be a very interesting conversation, and you are all invited on 19th of March. You can find more information for registration on Luma or on my LinkedIn as well. Thank you very much. So everything seems to be working with the people online. Please let me know on the chat if you can hear us, if you can see us. Nobody complained so far, so I suppose that it's going well. I am very glad to be here today, and we have those amazing speakers tonight. It was really like, I never imagined that one day I would be hosting an event at Sciences Po with Briac and Professor Agnes. They are really like top-notch speakers in this field, and it's really an honor to be here this evening. And to jump into the conversation and also to hand over the topic to our speakers, I would like to just say a brief word about AI in education. I really think that this topic is overlooked, and I do not understand exactly why it has not entered the mainstream AI topic so far, because it's so important. So I really do believe that one of the reasons why it's still not in the AI mainstream topics is because people do not understand how it can be impactful to our lives as a society. Especially, and we can think of some examples. For instance, if you are not a student, or if you are not a parent with children at school, if you are not a teacher, maybe it might seem like a very distant issue to you, but it's not. Because as far as I have seen, and I'm also a PhD researcher on AI and emotions, in any case, it's another topic, but we end up researching a lot about AI in general. And what I see is that AI in education is about accumulating cognitive advantage in this world through new tools that we have now at our disposal. So this is something that may impact this cognitive advantage that we can take from those tools, they impact directly social mobility and also people's life's trajectories and even destinies, if you want to use that catalyst word. So yes, it's about social mobility, this discussion, and it's shaping our society in many different ways. So it's a very thought-provoking topic, and I really am glad to host this conversation because it's one that can change society. And with that provocation, I am very pleased to introduce our speakers of this evening, starting with my brilliant colleague, Briac Sokaligun, economist, technologist, and COO of Compass Up. Briac studies the economic and institutional impacts of AI on education systems. He founded Compass Up to reduce information asymmetry in high school orientation and is currently working on infrastructure for AI-native universities. He is a predoctoral researcher at EMT Business School and holds degrees from UC Berkeley and Sciences Po. And also here with us, Professor Agnes van Santen, Emeritus Senior Research Professor at CNRS and Sciences Po. Agnes is an internationally recognized sociologist of education. Her work focuses on class-based and spatial education inequalities, elite education, access to higher education, and processes of social reproduction. Thank you very much. And I would like to start with Briac. Just a quick heads up for our audience. Our speakers will have amongst between 20 to 30 minutes to develop their insights. And afterwards, we will open up for the Q&A. So prepare your questions and comments. You are very welcome to speak. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Briac.
Yes, thank you very much, Anna Katerina, and thank you everyone to come. Thank you, Professor, to be here with us today. So, yeah, these are very important themes and questions in society. And as you said, AI in education isn't an overlooked topic. If we look at the venture capital going into AI and education startups, but also the size of the deals that are being made currently in the sector, it's very, very much lower than what is currently going on in other sectors like health, finance, of course, and other very, topics that you see every day in the news or on Twitter, X, social medias like this, as well as main deals on Crunchbase for startups. So I think when we're talking about AI in education, as you mentioned, there's a question of social mobility, but above all, there's a question of agents. And when I say agents, it's about people, not AI agents. And to whom you would give the tools to actually go further in society. So that's the part about social mobility. I don't think it is something that will work per se in autonomy, but I think organizations like parents, so the family, the social organization of the household, schools and universities have a huge role to play. And I don't think they have the means currently to guide the students with this work. So if we look at the different stakeholders, there's the household, the schools, the family, so teachers, students, parents, and there's also a lot of different companies, startups, big AI labs that are trying to propose some products and foundation models, which are used actually much more already by the students than the professors. And I think that's something that changed a little bit from the beginnings of the internet, where you would see the first usage of the internet that were in researchers and then teachers and passed by. And I think there's more of a grassroots, maybe adoption of AI in younger students, especially in primary school, secondary school. So just a quick story about what I'm doing. I founded two startups, actually one that, and we pivoted. We started working in orientation, as Anna Katarina said, and we developed an app to help French students evolved in the orientation system. So in France, in 12th grade, so terminal, students have to choose among 24,000 different programs to then go into higher education. And it's not like in the US or other Anglo-Saxon systems where you can specialize afterwards. You need to choose right away what studies you'll do. And they have a little help from their teachers in secondary school, but actually a lot of help from their parents. And we've saw that AI is really playing a role of mentor, a metacognition role of mentor to give information to a lot of students, while associations and parents and teachers didn't have necessarily the means to accompany them one by one. So there's approximately 700,000 12th graders in France each year. So, and there's not enough resources for that. If we look at the usage of ChatGPT, a lot of the share of prompts are to look at different information, and that would include the educational searches. And within that, that's also the orientation choices. And so when we come up with apps, there's two different ways to bring structured and well-thought AI into the hands of high schoolers. So there's the grassroots way of doing so, which would be, just coding an app and giving them unlimited access to it and to an AI model, which is actually what's happening with ChatGPT, Anthropic, so Claude, Gemini, which is free for a lot of students around the world. Or you can also reflect at how you would build the prompt and the workflow to use AI as a tool that would actually enhance social mobility. This opens on another debate, which would be how do you access AI, because AI has a lot of biases that are reproduced if you don't mediate it in your workflow. And from my experience, I think secondary teachers are not used at all to these concepts. In France, they would be risk averse to even thinking about using AI in their courses, which is a pain, because then that leads to the current situation, which is secondary students being left alone with these tools. And yeah, the broader question is, how do you build AI? How do you build produce that use AI? What some would call ChatGPT wrappers or GPT wrappers, and how these tools won't recreate the current inequalities. Currently, I don't think that per se AI is really enhancing social mobility. I think it's definitely permitting a lot of students to have more intellectual outputs and have access to much more information when they use it right. And I think you might talk about this in your presentation afterwards. So my experience was that secondary organizations are failing at integrating these new tools in their curricula. And then you have already the people from higher socioeconomic status that really leverage these tools to go further and be much more intuitive about how the higher education system works than they would a few years ago. And you have people who don't necessarily or are not necessarily helped. And when we worked with a lot of beta testers, high schoolers, they didn't think that actually fine-tuning a model was really helpful for them in their orientation. So fine-tuning a model is actually, let's say, training it to be more specialized on education. And a phenomenon we encountered was that a lot of people from lower economics background, especially in the Parisian suburbs, the banlieue Parisienne, were only putting their cover letter questions for Parcoursup in ChatGPT and were deeming that this would be enough, as opposed to people who were from the inner centers of Paris, in the top Parisian high schools. And these guys, they were really leveraging this to find a lot of different schools, so post-bac schools that you would join just after your secondary studies, and be much more educated on the different prépa and concours. So that's a main difference I found in France. And I think for now, we are not on the right path to actually increase social mobility using AI per se with the main foundation model providers. I think there's a huge need for more well-thought apps. But as we know, the VC ecosystem is not really inclined to finance this. And the public institutions are not really into financing AI anymore. What we've seen with the Ville de Paris and the BPI, the Banque Publique d'Investissement, so French Public Investment Bank, is that they are cutting a lot of fundings to AI startups, which actually leaves an open door, in my opinion, to the main companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, to get to the students. And as we've said just before, without a lot of guardrails and guidelines in the use. So that leads to how AI, in my experience, was used in higher education. Among these learnings, we've transitioned a bit to working more and more with private universities in France, mostly business schools, but also schools that have a hybrid status like Sciences Po. And they work a lot with the main AI companies. You might have heard that Neoma Business School and Sciences Po have a huge deal with OpenAI going on right now. And that's something we've already seen in US universities for some time. From what I experience, the IT teams have spent the past 20 years not really investing in technological infrastructure. If we take a step back and leave the AI topic, universities in Europe more broadly are just phasing out of the paper era, and they're currently rolling on Salesforce, so unified data architecture. And AI is something that will probably happen and be integrated in a maybe more educated way in 5 to 10 years in French universities. But I think we have sometimes before this happens, from what we experience as well with Clarkos, trying to build an AI native unified ERP, enterprise resource planning software, the incentive infrastructure in the organizations that are the private schools and the universities is kind of broken from a principal agent problem, so an economic modeling. And that means that sometimes the projects are very late, and it's more always than sometimes, and also that the head of the schools, even though they are in a phase in France at least where they lose a lot of money, for instance, HEC being the most expensive school in France, with I think it's 70 principle, which is the fact that an AI user actually thinks he's talking to a real person to do their homework, which is actually, at least according to the first studies, something that has a good effect on students. So they were using this principle to integrate AI as the basis to integrate AI in their curricula for different pedagogical missions in mathematics, English classes. And they were also using that to permit the implementation of different chatbots and emergency bots to give resources to students who had who were going through different types of crises, like they were homeless or they didn't have the financial means to buy food at the end of the month. And in the US, you might know that there's a lot more funding than in France, especially in public universities, for this kind of centers. But students don't necessarily know them, and AI was especially used in these less wealthy schools to help students. And so that's something I've really seen as a difference to France, where in France, the schools that were more prone to actually say that they were using AI were the main business schools, so schools that and students that typically don't have this kind of issues. And at the same time, these are the schools that are the less efficient, just because they have an audience, students that don't really need help for productivity and for pedagogical help. And when you go see different public or private education groups that were focusing on an audience of students that were out of prison or that were parents at a very young age or that dropped out of school several times. These guys were the most efficient, and they haven't rolled out on the AI yet for, I think, probably a geopolitical reason, which is that the main people that are able to help them integrate AI natively in their workflows are the main providers, which are OpenAI and Anthropic mainly, who are doing moves in France in the educational sectors, and they're very expensive. A deal for a particular process, like automating questions to different students in a particular center, costs approximately maybe 1 million point two, so 1,200,000 euros. Whereas, and even French actors like Mistral would be slightly less, would amount to slightly less than 1 million euros. So I think we're really lacking competition in this field, and yeah, we need a lot more startups to actually enact AI operations with the teachers and foster different discussions to first not letting students use AI without guardrails and enhance the social mobility and cognitive advances they can develop using AI. Also go past the first fear of AI adoption for secondary teachers, the organizational inefficiency in universities, and AI slop for AI startups, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Beriak. So let's move forward with the talk of Professor Agnes. Professor Agnes, thank you very much. The floor is yours. We proceed to questions afterwards. I think it will be most productive. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think I am not at all a specialist of artificial intelligence, but I'm a sociologist of education, and I do a lot of empirical work. And that means that I have, of course, to take into account everything that is going on, that is changing in the field. So I came upon this use of digital devices and AI, and so I'm interested in the topic, but although very open to what is going on. So first, in research on higher education, particularly in France, for a long time, most research has focused mostly on long-range factors affecting access to higher education. Of course, families, in the transmission of aspiration, taste, knowledge to their children, but also, of course, how the kind of choices that families make or do not make because they cannot make them, choices of school careers, choices of schools, tracks, and options. And also a lot of focus has been put on schools, both the transmission again of aspirations, taste, knowledge, but also the fact that particularly in secondary schools in France compared to other countries. We were talking about the US. In France, we have a strong tracking system in upper secondary schools, which is really very determinant for access to higher education, which is not the case in the US and in other countries. But in my research, in a recent research I have been conducting for the last 7 years, I wanted to focus mostly on short-term factors in access to higher education. So I devised a project with a focus on networks, institutions, and markets. And what I mean here is with networks, I'm not talking about social networks, although they're important as well. I was focusing on personal networks. What's the role of family and friends, but also peers in schools, and also the type of relationship that develops with students who are not friends, who are not peers, but there is some kind of relationship that starts to be developed. Then when I talk about institutions, I mean secondary schools mostly, also higher education institutions, state agencies, but also all types of institutional devices that are used. And then on the part on markets, I focus mostly on private actors, whether they can be private schools, private higher education institutions, private agencies, but also all types of market digital devices. So, of course, these three modes of organizations overlap, as you can see, networks, institutions, and markets. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we did, which is, I think, very preliminary, but there is no research in France on this, so it was opening up the field, and I will be happy to do more. Especially I'm working with PhD students, and I'm working with other students who know much more than me on digital devices and AI, so they can help in all the technical side that I don't master. So what I want to talk first is on social cultural inequalities in relation to the information that is provided by digital devices. And what we find here is at the same time something that we find elsewhere. So it's no different from what we find on paper information, if you want, but also certain things that are different and that require perhaps more reflection. So first is the question about accessing information, and I think many actors in this field, one of their main arguments, which in fact is a good argument, is that information is rendered much more accessible. And this is very important in the French context because the French system is very opaque and many important information is not really accessible, and that's why gives a lot of advantage to upper class students and families is that they have the capacity to get that information that other students don't have. At the same time, as a sociologist, I'm very much aware of the importance of whether it is enough just to put information there. And this is an ongoing debate with my colleagues who are economists, who also think that just giving information is fine. And I keep telling them, are you sure that people are accessing that information? And so we did a small study in 7 secondary schools, and this was just asking students about their project for higher education. They will have 40 minutes to go on the internet, so we put them in front of the computer and you said you can do whatever you want on the internet. And so we were tracing what they were doing on the internet, and at the same time we were observing how they use the internet and also they were talking or not, etc. And one of the things we're working on is an article now showing the huge difference there is in the keywords that students use to get information on the internet. So students from the professional tracks, the vocational tracks, or the technological tracks compared to those in the academic tracks, and students from with the lower class backgrounds, they will use very few words that were very redundant, very similar to each other, and so words that were not very accurate. So the kinds of information they got was very limited, and the other student from the academic track, from an upper class background, will use a lot of different words, etc. And so it was very important to understand these differences in the number of words, the accuracy, the variety, and also the capacity to avoid getting trapped into a specific agency. For instance, in France, if you ask for a higher education institutions, you have all chances to get into one of the two major private agencies. And if you don't use other words, etc., you will keep going round through the same agency, and you will not get any additional information. And many students from the vocational tracks and the lower class backgrounds did not do that. So I have not done that with EI, but I think many things can be transposed in the sense that the same type of problems might arise, the accuracy of the prompts, their sophistication, the capacity to explore a topic further, etc. A second thing has to do with not just accessing the information, but understanding the information. And it's important to see, well, first, the French system, I'm going to give an example in a minute. The French system is particularly complex. I keep thinking it's the most complex in the world because I haven't found yet another system among those that I know about, which has so many different tracks, so many different types of institutions. So it's extremely complex with a lot of internal hierarchies and very different selection practices across institutions. So it's very difficult for students to understand. Even for the upper class students, it's not sure that they can master that. Just looking at the PowerPoint that the Minister of Education has prepared gives you an idea of this huge complexity, although it is totally out of date and not extremely useful. Also, many people who provide this data think that all students really understand easily statistical data. Many students in the vocational tracks, even thinking about percentage, even thinking about rates, things that are extremely simple for a person who is in the academic track, it's something that they don't understand, and this creates a kind of fear about this information, and it makes it like they don't trust the information because they don't understand it. Also, it's very difficult for them to understand the implicit messages behind institutional information, difficult to make relevant comparisons, and difficult, and this is like a third step, is even if they understand the information, are they able to strategically use the information? And I think many students that I have interviewed, they are not able to use the information strategically. You can ask them, you see that they understand the information, and what are you going to do about that? And they say, well, I don't know. So it doesn't mean that they will use it. So I think we have to be careful about this. So I took some very quick examples here. And before that, I also wanted to talk, I already mentioned that, the importance of emotional factors. I think that we tend to underestimate a lot the huge impact that some of this simple information can have on students. For instance, you learn when you get access to the information, the number of students who are admitted, and you see that is half of the group that applied or less. They say only 1% of students from technological tracks got admitted. So that again, if you are in a technological track. This is the importance that we give to grades, if your grades are not very high, etc. And then there is all the additional information on progression rates, rates of entry into the labor market. So there is a mix of not always understanding and being afraid of what's the meaning of this data. So I took some examples here, but this, unfortunately, they're in French. It would have taken me a lot of time to translate them. This is something I have studied myself in another research. These are health studies in France, medical studies, but more generally, health studies. They are particularly complex. There was a reform, a recent reform. There are 2 tracks to get in. And when you look at it, even if you are a researcher like me, you still need some time to understand the 2 tracks, how they work, what happens if you fail after the first year in this track, in the other track, etc. So this information, this is provided by the Minister of Education in the platform, the digital platform, which is called Parcoursup, and it looks very clear. But in fact, it's extremely difficult to understand for many students. This is again another example. Another example, these are some of the data that are provided by Parcoursup. Again, very simple data, but as I was telling you, there is a combination of cognitive and emotional factors. So here you see that the number of candidates that are accepted, that are admitted, etc. Then you see how important the different factors are, and you see the very important way of school results. And this relates to something that Briac was saying, is that many lower class students, because now in this platform, when you apply to any kind of track or training, you need to fill a small statement letter. It's very small, but many lower class students, especially because of the messages they get, they think this letter is very important. And in many of the tracks they apply to, no one looks at the letter, and they spend a lot of time working on that. And so they realize here that what are important are school results, methods of work, which are again related to their school results, and very little about their motivation or about other things that they can put that. And also they get information at what are the chances of being admitted depending on the track. This is, I chose a bachelor's degree in law, and this is the information that was provided to students. And again, this is simple information about entry into the labor market, how many students go on into the second year, what's the salary. So the minister is very proud of saying that they provide more and more information each year, which I think it's good in itself. But the problem is that very little investment is put in whether all students are able to use this and access this information, use it strategically, understand the information, and what kind of emotional reaction this information can create in students. The second thing I wanted to say is the difficulty that many lower class students have in distinguishing between what is information and what is marketing. So I did not do this study on internet, but we did a very large study on higher education fairs in France. And I think, again, that this can be transposed on the internet. And I looked for some data on the internet so I could put some examples here. So one of the things we found in the higher education fairs in the Parisian regions, which are a little bit different from other regions in France, because there is a lot of private education in the Parisian region. So at least from 80 to 90% of the higher education institutions that go to the fairs trying to catch students are private institutions. And so the fairs present a very embellished situation about accessing to higher education. One first thing is about the transition is going to be very easy. There is a world of opportunities for everyone. So this is something I copied from a private agency on the internet that offers a coaching service. So our specialist coaches will help you develop your skills, boost your self-confidence, manage stress, resolve family issues, everything. We believe in your potential and we do everything we can to support you. Another thing is that everything about the experience of higher education is wonderful. It takes place in magnificent surroundings, well-equipped study places. It offers a variety of extracurricular activities. So then I put a quote about this. It is an institution that is just marketing the premises that is offering. And then the last thing is about success and job market opportunities. And again, many times when you go to the higher education fairs, but the same is true on the internet, is that everyone is going to get a highly skilled job in new industries, doing wonderful kinds of activities, etc. And many students that I have interviewed that are in the technological and vocational tracks and come from lower class backgrounds that do not get a lot of help from their families and frequently not from their teachers as well. They have a lot of problems distinguishing between information and marketing, and so they are easy subjects to be caught up by actors who on the internet or in the fairs are trying to catch these students. And another thing I wanted to say, but this is a little bit more tentative because I haven't done really work on this myself, is about the kind of thing that is provided now by some of the providers on the internet. Some of the things that they do is, this is also going on in the fairs, is the important thing about going to higher education is that you have to know yourself. So there is a lot of tests, a lot of things just trying to do this. So everything is about your tastes, about your extracurricular interest, about everything. The problem is that in France, many institutions, I mean, the great majority of institutions really admit students on the basis of their results. So all the things about tastes, extracurricular activities are very, very minor. And in fact, they intervene mostly for students to apply to very prestigious institutions like Sciences Po, where you have an interview, for instance, for admission. And so that your school results are extremely important, but the interview still plays a role. And this is true for the management schools that you were mentioning as well. It's much less true for most of the other tracks and also the other higher education offerings in France. And so you have this mix of, you have this information, you see, with small figures. So these are pleasant students. So it's more about, is this something that you like or you don't like, etc. But at the end of the story is whether you are good or not. So when you look at the programs, in fact, what's the ideal profile? So the idea is you like math and logic, but in fact, what this means is you are good in math and logic, and then follows some qualities that you might have. So in fact, this creates a confusion for many of the students. Of course, the upper class students and the upper class parents, they see through this and there is no problem on this. But many students that I have interviewed, they get very confused. So the important thing is what I like, what I enjoy, everything. But this is not true in the real world of access to higher education in France. And so also what is promoting on this through these startups or these different agencies on the internet, but also in the fairs, is the process of identification with student ambassadors. And I think a lot of progress has been made in this area in the fact that, of course, there is a diversity of people that are presented now. They are not all white upper class students, of course. You get different profiles of students, but at the end, again, what they are talking about when they're really talking about how did they get in, how did they succeed. They are talking about all academic qualities that were required to get admitted and to succeed. Of course, focusing on different things depending on the track. So I put here the preparatory classes, which are very prestigious higher education tracks in France, and then this is a 2-year training in construction, which is totally different. But again, you are putting an emphasis on different behavioral qualities that are rewarded in the training. So not to be too long, and just to the very open conclusion is I do believe that digital devices and AI have a strong capacity to reach a very large number of young people, to provide a wide amount of information, to give advice in a personalized manner on higher education, and using a variety of devices that really can be attractive to the students and can reach them. But many of them still are using underlying models based on an ideal, rational decision maker, just focusing on the kind of student they were, of the kind of milieu they come from. And they are paying little attention to both these cognitive cultural inequalities between students and the interference of emotional factors. And other actors, and unfortunately, many of them, because there are many now market actors who are developing this on the internet, are using these devices from a more stricter market perspective, deliberately misleading young people to seduce them into applying to certain higher education institutions or buying certain guiding service. There is no perfect solution for these problems. I do believe they can be reduced. First, by using more sophisticated models, and I think Brian was just mentioning some of the innovation he has introduced, that models can be more sophisticated and more based on research. Both research on cognitive factors, research on emotional factors, research with true students using these different devices. Also, I think we need a stronger state regulation on deceptive messages. There is some there are some tentatives now. I think they're very timid and they don't go very far, but there are some attempts to regulate these messages on the internet and on the fairs. And also, as Brian was saying, I think it's very important to train secondary school teachers into helping students, especially the most disadvantaged students, because other students can be on their own and be helped by their parents, but also help them in different ways to cognitively understand the information and the advice that they provide, use it in critical ways, and also mediate their message with more personalized advice that, for instance, will reduce the negative impact of some of the messages and some of the advices that students can get. Of course, as Brian was saying, I think one of the problems, the big problems we have in France is that secondary school teachers, they don't want to get involved into guidance. They think it is not their mission, and they have very little incentive to do so, no financial incentive, few hours to do that. But when you are in a disadvantaged school, you have so many other things to take care of that just providing guidance is like a luxury for some of the secondary school teachers that I have interviewed. So there is a lot to do here to provide incentives to teachers that do not necessarily have to be financial only, but also making them interested into that. I think it has to be introduced into initial teacher training from the very beginning. And perhaps we have an opportunity now because we're going to recruit many new teachers in the years to come. But I think this is very open to the decisions that will be taken in that respect. But I think that that is very important because although I do believe that all these technical devices can be very useful, I think the human mediation is very important, especially for young people. So the mediation by parents is not always possible, but at least the mediation by teachers, perhaps by peers that can help in different ways, I think is particularly important. And I will stop.
Thank you very much for those great insights, Professor Agnes. It was great to listen to you. Now I would like to open for questions. I apologize to the people online. There were some technicalities here, but we will work this out, and I hope that you can still hear us and see us. Here, for the people on site, any questions so far? I have a question. I would like to start to open the debate. While you both were speaking, I was remembering of some philosophers, because I have also a background in philosophy. And especially I was remembering of John Rawls, that you might know. He was speaking about the principle of difference and how we could deal with inequalities in order to reduce them, of course. And one of the things that John Rawls was saying is that the only way that we could secure total equality for children at the start of their lives was if we could take them out of their families. Because the family is shaping basically everything that you learn in the first years, the type of education that you get, the type of training, not only morally, but also in a professional way afterwards. So families and schools. And I was here wondering if you have seen in your research data about the difference in social classes, in students using AI or digital devices in social classes. I have the impression that in the future, there might be a gap between the less advantaged classes and the wealthier classes because of this. High income people, they generally have a better training to use AI. There is already something related to the use of technology or the internet to start with. So when we speak about those big digital divides in the world, we are talking about internet and technology, but we also can transpose this to technology now related to AI. And I really do think that we see this gap growing between families and schools that have a better access and training to use those AIs, and the less advantaged ones that unfortunately, perhaps because of many gaps in education per se, they have not reached this phase, this level of training to the AI tools. How do you see that in the future? There would be a difference between classes, I mean students that are poor and have not had the access to proper training with AI, and the students that are, let's say, wealthier.
Well, we already see, of course, these gaps. This is not something new. These gaps, I think, is what we work on when we do the sociology of education more generally. I think the most interesting question now is whether this is going to create greater gaps or reduce the gap, because the gap is already extremely high. And I think that there is, as I said, there is a strong social-cultural gap. And I think, well, what is interesting for me is whether there are new functionalities in these devices that will increase the gap, or whether they have the potential of reducing the gap. Of course, we cannot reduce extremely what is going on in the families. It's very difficult to imagine that you will train the parents. You can have some programs that will train parents, but that's something very limited that we can do in that area, but you can make a difference in the schools. I worry a lot that, of course, many schools will get much more training. The upper class schools will train students to use this in very sophisticated ways, and will still increase the gap. But I think still, although I think the technical functionalities are very important, I always say I'm extremely bad with technology, but I do have cultural capital. So even if my technique is extremely bad, I always find the information that I want to find. I understand the information that I find, and I'm able to strategically use it, although I have to ask sometimes my children, my husband, my colleagues, etc., to help me with some of the technicalities. So I think the cultural gap is the most important thing. But I still think that there might be some possibilities that we can use some of the functionalities to reduce that gap. I'm not totally optimistic because it depends on many decisions that must be taken, but I do think, but I'm afraid that indeed there might be, and especially I think the gap will be, because it's also an economic gap, that many private schools with a lot of upper class students will train them to use AI in very sophisticated way, and public schools will not have the resources to do that. So the gap will increase if there is nothing that is done specifically to reduce that.
Yes, definitely. And I think on a social point of view of learning to prompt, for instance, or to use AI, we could draw a parallel with the use of any kind of tools or the computer. I think I might be even less optimistic than you are on the technical points. I think we are more and more seeing differentiation on the use of more premium models, and from that point, there's no question that people won't be able to afford, or some people won't be able to afford the premium subscription to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini at some point, even though they are trying to onboard students for at least a year for free, most of them. And if we add to this something that's coming up these days, which is the advertisement within the interface, like ChatGPT, for instance, I think this is an even more problematic type of thing, because people who already don't have the means to buy a more advanced foundation model to use to do their different tasks or research will also have even like a greater weight on critical thinking to actually differentiate on what's an ad and what's concrete real information, which is a handicap for people who have less means and less guidance. So yeah.
Please go ahead.
Very insightful. I wonder, because the way you guys are framing it, and the way I perceive it as well, is that this AI is kind of acting like a polarizing force, and that the more privileged classes are going to get better thanks to their AI, are more efficient, more productive, and the lesser privileged classes won't. Do you see solutions to that issue, and where would they come from? Because you mentioned a lot of startups, but that sounds to me kind of also like a supply side solution, which doesn't really focus on the basic literacy that they need to be able to use the tools that are created by these startups.
Well, I think Greg might have a lot to say on that. I think, as I was saying, I think because I think there is both a technological dimension and a cultural dimension. I think the school still can do a lot on the cultural side, just teaching much more critical skills, because general critical skills, as I was saying, using my personal case, is extremely important for later be able to critically use the information, distinguish between marketing and true information, etc. So I think there is still a lot of work to instill in these critical skills in schools, but it means more general reduction of educational inequalities across schools. And also then I think that, of course, is for the state to provide more tools that can be more sophisticated for the students. I don't think the public schools will be able to catch up with what will go on in the private sector. But still, I think much more can be done than is done at the moment. Because I think because teachers resist to this, because this represents huge investment for the state, I think they are living it at the, as you were saying, the grassroots level, at the level of students. And of course, this is creating a lot of inequalities. And they are not always very visible, because this is going on in all areas in society, is that in the past, if we go back to the 19th century, the differences frequently across social classes were quantitative. Now many differences are qualitative. It's not, do people are reading books? Yes, they're reading, but what kind of book? Do they are using AI? What kind of they are using? So it's you will say no, but you can see a lot of lower class students are using ChatGPT today, even more. I will bet than upper class students to some extent. But for what purposes? What are they getting out of it? What kind of device they are using, etc. That is really what is making the difference. So I think it's very important to understand these qualitative differences and what's the impact on this. Not
Yeah, definitely. And I think you can come back to Gramsci and see the application of this in a lot of different contexts, books, TV, computer, and access to digital information. I think it's a problem of demand as well, as you were mentioning. So for this, education is so important. And this comes back to technological literacy as a public good. And however, I'm strongly convinced that we need more competition in the market, and that means more startups and initiative and entrepreneurship in the large sense of the word for AI in Europe and in France and in education, to have more solutions and more well-thought solutions. If you look at what's being done, for instance, the French government is trying to conceive different AI models and AI apps for education and research. There was a math LLM that was tried out, which wasn't very good. But at the same time, that's something I believe the French government really needs to do. And there's always this debate: is it a loss of money because you will still have this inequality of people who are more well off that will use more advanced models that I say this kind of bad math LLM or very advanced reasoning model like, I don't know, Claude Opus 4.6. And also, I do believe it's a demand side. Yeah, you need to push much more French and European and AI education native solutions. At the same time, I think they also need to integrate state-of-the-art technologies. The CNRS, I think it was today or maybe yesterday, announced that they were forbidding the use of any other tools that were not their own LLM. I think that's a bad idea, because you would create a difference between the US, who are already publishing a lot of research and using state-of-the-art top models who are very, very strong to produce research, do literature reviews, roll out a lot of different quantitative and qualitative studies, and French researchers who might be very well trained on the human side, but with much less means. And you come back to the training, but also the resources you have at hand.
Please, so comments on the so until now, a lot of the French understand this, So I really like the discussion happening. I don't teach at the high school level, I'm more at the postdoc and PhD level, so I can see from that perspective. But we talk about very happening and give some 2 cents what's happening. So we are allowed to use, let's say, a CDA, we are allowed to use for open source, and then there's no problem. I really like the point, and I said that there are 4 things to do. We will reduce this imbalance, because now, to buy an application like for 20 years, there are countries like Estonia that have made publicly free for everybody to have it in mind. So most probably we will have in France and Europe to have a discussion with this party. Think more than it would, and we should do this free, because really it's like we can find them this summer so that they will be more from this class. We don't pay anything. You pay to them because at least they are doing something good. and they give it a free resources to CNRS and to the resources so that they can all go together. So from my perspective, there is a hope. As you said. But it's good to understand what's happening at the advanced school level because recently we had two students who came to CA because when we were going to high school, they wanted to a university or science academy to see how scientists works. And I was asking them, one was in Ceylon, one was in so I don't engineer. I'm French now, I'm in India, so I have never studied in the French system. So it's a different system that we study. I'm not PhD here. So I'm in a different perspective. But so when they came from the second, and I was giving them the insights about AI, I never used it properly. And I was like, we're not school. But then we go to the other side. The other side is, if they start using AI in the early stage, the competitors go to not have it. So how to balance it? You guys have it. It's very interesting problem. Thank you, Anna, for this video that you let me come and very nice. Thank you.
You want to make a comment, Brian?
I mean, that's a great point. And I think we go back to the technological accuracy and AI as a public good concept, and also a dynamic of mutual health that is taking place in the US when you think about it. I mean, research is fueling the different public research, and university research is fueling the AI labs. The government is fueling the AI labs, and AI labs are providing a lot of compute and AI resources to the education scene. But yeah, as far as the cognitive development is concerned, I think there's definitely a huge need for education. At the same point, whatever you'll do, but this is my 2 cents, like not very much scientifically based. People will have a grassroots adoption of it, and I would say, and that's my tech bro side, but that it is similar to seeing the computer rival in universities, and saying that to some extent you won't remember information more than if you were writing it by hand, but you have much more power and productivity that is unlocked because of that tool.
No, I think we have to really now. I'm not a specialist on pedagogy, for instance, but I do think that, of course, we have to think the whole pedagogy. I mean, the goal is always the same, I think, is to develop all our intellectual capacities. And I think you can use, of course, able to develop your intellectual capacities and especially your critical skills. But I worry that if you don't do that, of course, it can replace certain things, and it will not be useful for that, especially for the more disadvantaged students, because I think that the advantaged students will always manage to do that either by themselves, with the help of their parents, etc. I also think that there might be, going back to the discussion on the social class divide, because I'm very interested also on more sophisticated divides, we can say. I wonder whether this AI phenomena is going to increase the difference between the economic fractions and the cultural fractions, because at the same time, I think people who have a lot of cultural capital, high levels of education, will be able to use these devices in creative and innovative ways. But at the same time, you need a lot of money to get the most sophisticated equipment and devices. So this might increase the economic divide, as I was saying, between private schools and public schools, between institutions like Sciences Po that can buy some sophisticated forms that we could use in the future, and other universities in France that probably will have none. So.
You raised your hand, right?
Yeah, I have a question on the gender gap, because like some people say that women, for instance, they use less elements than like in the percent. So like I was wondering at this stage, like for the students of for like the number one, is there a gender gap, or it's like not relevant compared to the wealth gap?
I don't know if you have read recent studies on that. I think from what I have read, in fact, I think that it's mostly again like qualitative differences for what do they use it for, and I think the uses are differentiated. For instance, women will use them more for emotional support, for instance, and boys will use them more for games and different activities of that kind. I think in general, in most educational systems, girls succeed better at school. Is this going to create a barrier for them? Is this a way of reducing the advantage they have gained? I think this is open. I haven't read of any research showing that it either reduces the gap or increases the gap, but I think it's an important area of research, especially how is it used. I would tend to think that this might not have any important effect from upper class girls and boys, and I think will be useful both to use them in an effective way. I would like to see what is going to happen for more disadvantaged students from different gender. So yes.
Yeah, I haven't read the recent research on that, but I do have data on my users from the app
Yes?
we launched, and there wasn't anything groundbreaking. You would see more women using the app, but I think it also goes back to the fact that
They do more on guidance as well. They take more information and
yeah, they
advice.
invest more time and resources to prepare better, also because they might be less helped by their relative to be pushed towards elite studies. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for the interesting thoughts and Susan was researchers. I really appreciate how you were both very precise. What is the AI in education about? Such a broad topic and such a broad innovation in AI. So we're talking about a chatbot, but what help to decide which track could be beneficial for you? Or are we talking about providing AI to students to help them study or understand topic, accessing information? Because when I think of these technologies, I think they can provide you new, easier ways to do something. I think of Google Maps helps me to understand where to go usually, but I did lose the skill reading map as well as before. Like I did lose some competences because it made it easier. I don't have to develop this. And when we talk about AI in education, I'm thinking very quickly that it will give us access to easier creative writing for no reason, because we don't have to think ourselves and read these sources and give this argument. So I have this first intuition, and I haven't read all the research on this, that it will perhaps make us a bit more lazy to voice our opinion, to voice and construct our argument. So I'll be very curious what you think of this part of this general push, bringing AI to all the students to bring it in education. And especially with that cultural gap that Professor Agnes also mentioned, knowing how to find information, access to information, we understand and make a decision. If we're going to have that in prompts to the chatbots, are we not also losing that skill to do that ourselves in situation? So I'm curious if you see, if I think about AI in education, first thing I think we should educate people into a critical decision on whether to use it or not. That would be the first topic I'm very interested in. It doesn't have to be through an AI to learn that skill as well. And then I'll be curious, given all your experience in school and different social strata, where do we put that as a priority, or perhaps other key learning goals that maybe are more important than learning critical competencies about it?
No, I agree completely. I think that what is important is really how to use these tools in a critical way, because I think it's important that, well, this is the response that AI gave to me. Are there other possibilities, etc.? And that's what I personally always do, because as a researcher, you have this kind of critical mind. I say, well, this is the solution. Even when I ask just for simple translation and say, no, I'm going to look for other ways because, etc. So it's every time having this critical, because otherwise, of course, the temptation will be very strong just to fall for that. And I said it is a double problem. I think it's a cognitive problem and also a problem of getting entangled with all the marketing that might be behind, or of course, all the fake news, etc., that might be introduced through that. So I think in the kind of society where we live, it's extremely important to have this critical view of all the technology and all we can access, and also this capacity to distinguish what is important information, because we are flooded through information. We can have so easy access, and I think it's a critical skill now how to use that information and very immediately distinguish what is something that has been proven, something that can be fake, and also what is important, what is less important, is secondary, etc. And I think, unfortunately, because schools have so many difficulties, many students do not learn these critical skills in schools. It's only a few of them, and this becomes a privilege to be able to be critical, and that's a big problem. I think it's not only a problem about inequality, it's a problem about democracy, etc. So it's a very wide problem. So I think we really, I think it's an important reflection we should have.
Just to add on that, if I may, I'm very interested in this topic as well. And as I have been reading and researching about it, we have two different phenomena. First one is cognitive offloading. That is precisely what you just mentioned in your question. The fact that we ask AI to perform tasks for us. But now we came to another point, a different point in society, in which we have something that many researchers are calling belief offloading. So it means that since we are using AI not only to perform simple tasks, but also for personal and very intimate advice, for instance, a student may ask, am I good at this or that? What professional career should I follow? It means that we are offloading or delegating our beliefs as well to the AI, because the AI is going to respond to us according to the data that is available online and also the memory that it has on us. So at the end, we receive an answer that is the vision and the opinion, if I may say, of the AI about us. So we are being seen through the eyes of the AI. And this is shaping as well our beliefs, not only for, let's say, career things and decisions, but also morally speaking. And I think that this is very important to students now, because many students are also using AI for personal advice, especially the ones using AI companions, for instance. So it's very concerning. There is a question coming from the online audience, the question by Daniel Green, and he asks, as AI becomes less expensive and traditional education becomes more expensive, will AI create a new inequality where credentials remain costly? Who would like to take on this one?
Gabriel, you want to?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure if these two phenomena are related per se. I mean, I do think there's a correlation. I'm not sure if there's a causality between these. However, I would say that's a good thing in the sense that the point of AI becoming free is that you can actually be more productive if you use it well. If education becomes merely a credential, then that doesn't really play in the equation. From a purely very rational point of view, almost economic modeling. And then we get all the social stuff of will you get hired or not. But yeah, I think there's also all the non-traditional education that comes at play. I mean, it might not matter if you Harvard educated, if you actually know how to use AI and do your task. I do think we're in research, especially in the US, we tend to see this slightly more, even though I'm not sure if there's a statistically significant effect overall, but yeah.
I think I skipped Lorenzo's because you raised your arm, right? And I had sorry, so I will hand over to him and then to you both.
I just want to make a comment on that. So I think in the industry, and there's something kind of turned into independent researchers, I come from AI security, from the US. So I do agree that there is going to be a difference in the way that upper class students and more privileged students might use AI more so to accelerate their wealth, to build, to create. We already see that, but at the same time, at least in the US, like degrees matter less. So it's all about what you're building, experiencing, creating. I think the last people I hired, I really just look at their portfolio, their GitHub, I think we have really into school. And that might be a disadvantage to upper class students actually, or, more privileged students that are relying on these old structures. So kind of tying it back to the inequality conversation, it's really difficult to change culture. That it's already providing the gap for a lot of folks, but yeah, it would be a matter of us and credentials, where we're going to be like, what are you capable of doing, and not just a resume of all of this, you can stop by a couple of projects, so.
Yes, I think it is much more true, of course, in the US than in France, because France is a very credential society and the credential really plays different roles. But I think that I think that there is a possibility that, of course, people will earn a kind of cultural and social capital by training themselves into this new technologies. I don't think this is going to really reduce the gap between the upper classes and the lower classes, but I think it might make a difference across these different, between these different groups. I mean, across within the lower classes or within the lower middle classes, is whether you are able to use opportunities to create a portfolio of different things that can be technical skills, soft skills, etc. Probably much more in societies like the US or in other countries, not in France, but I still think it might be important, because I think we're in a context where there is now a difference between people that are seen as able to take opportunity and seize opportunity and use them, and others. I don't think that this is going to reduce the huge gap between the upper class and the lower class, but I do think that that make a difference across these groups, and I have been studying that a little bit in my analysis of social mobility in the French context, is that it does make a small difference.
Yeah, I think I would agree on that. You also come back to the economic means. I mean, you can construct a portfolio much like a GitHub coding portfolio much more in an easier way. However, that costs a lot if you want to be really fast or have really advanced code. I mean, for instance, ChatGPT and manually copy pasting code snippets might not do the trick, especially for advanced CS research. And at that point, you would need to pay for Cloud Code, which is at least $20 per month. But then, since you use all your credits in a day, especially since they have Cloud Opus 4.6 now, then you need to pay even more than that, up to $200 per week. So I think you go back to the economic side of the things. And on average, you might rebalance the overall macroeconomic almost equation, because I think you've heard that a few months ago, there was a study that showed that actually college might not be the good choice economically to find a job after 4 years now. I mean, as a college educated person, I would still recommend to go to university. I won't do the tech bro, thesis of dropping everything out to build a company or build with AI. But I do think the economic question matters and has a play on the sociological and social mobility equation.
It will also depend to the extent to which some employers will find it more interesting to pay for this kind of training than to pay for graduates. And that for me is an area where I don't do research myself, but I think it's a very important area, and I'm sure there are going to be big changes in that as well.
I have kind of a historical question and philosophical question. Back in this century, we see Socrates was famously reported that turning to books to learn would reduce our critical thinking because we could not ask the other questions. Then we developed books about books to explain them. We extended teaching to the point where we had teachers explaining the problems. Fast forward 2,500 years, in the 70s, we brought on calculators. They were very expensive, and we had very similar concerns. Only the rich are going to be able to afford them. People are going to lose basic cognitive skills like the ability to do lower order math. What's happened since then is that the price of calculators is essentially dropped down to an affordable level. And what we observe is that like on an everyday basis, we're maybe not as good as our father and mothers at everyday calculation, but in school, we are able to engage in higher order math thanks to delegating the low order math to the calculators. And so my question would be, how is the AI phenomenon different from those two phenomena? Just that.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I think
So first,
that's very much a philosophy-oriented question, right?
Mhm.
Well, I could respond to this in several ways, but what I can really think of, Lorenzo, is that indeed we had many tools in the history of humanity, and perhaps we have started with stones and fire. However, AI is a totally new phenomena because what it can cause and have as a matter of impact to society is totally different from what fire, stones, or books did previously. And especially because AI can establish what we call a relationship with human beings, be it professional, just for tasks, or personal for belief offloading, as we said before, or even emotional for emotional support. So it's not just a trivial device or tool that we have developed as humanity. It can really have different impacts on us, and profound ones. It talks back. You can say that books are talking back to us in our imagination, but it's not the same when you can really interact with an AI the way it does. And because of this interactive possibility, and also because of the fact that it can read mostly all of the data, or almost all of the data that was produced in the history of humanity, this represents a new power, socially speaking, authority as well. So I do not think that we can ever compare AI with any other tool, device, artifact, or technology that was previously developed. This would be my answer.
Activity, scale, and
Power.
sheer access to data.
knowledge, yes.
Okay, thank you. Very much.
What tools do that have? Because various branding in occidental that are old, which has been digitalized everywhere on the internet. And this is some of the messages to say previously. It's not data also fake news, etc. So I think it's very interesting because it's both as you said, very powerful before, but also, like Maya, we can learn a little bit if we not train ourselves, critical thinking, etc. So, it's really, and it's very dangerous. They really do, it's, very, impactful, and, we don't have something else in history with that power on the, so it's great.
So I think you agree with those.
No, it's, so we you in the sense that it is, a device that really, make the humanity have a good step. The sense of the technology is things up, and I will only hope that it will have the effect of calculators. But it can also, be more,
Yes, I think one of the thing interesting about what you said is that I think, and it's something new for me in the type of research I have been doing, is that we have to be much more aware of inequalities in vulnerability, and that's, I think, a new area of research, is that it's not only about whether people understand, but also how people, how their self-concept, how they relate, how their emotions are involved in the process, and what it is going to produce. And I think this is like a whole new area of research for us as well, because we are not used to think of inequalities in terms of vulnerability, but I think it's extremely important, and EI is really, it's not the only domain, but EI is very important to reflect on this, and especially with young people, how vulnerable they are to the messages they receive. Because I think one of the advantages also of the upper class students is frequently not only their cognitive advantage, but they have a good self-concept, because they have always succeeded. So they, of course, that doesn't mean that they don't have family problems or personal problems, but in general, they will have a greater self-concept, etc. So when they engage, the way they receive the message, they are also engaging emotionally with a higher self-concept than the other students. So that, I think, for me, it's something new that I think we have to work on, and I think it's important.
Just go very quick. Third question, I guess my question is for you. Do universities provide you with any kind of information and guidance around engaging with AI, or how good professionals are engaging with it, or how students should be using it? When I went to school, we had turnitin.com, which verified the plagiarism. But is there such a tool for AI detection, or should students be citing AI in their papers? How does that kind of work in today's society? I'm at a school.
I think as Brian said very quickly in his presentation, in France, I think we're very well behind giving guidelines to everyone. So for the time being, it's mostly about beware that students may be using AI. And so perhaps you can go back and use paper for the evaluations, etc. So these can be the kinds of recommendations that we get. Probably at Sciences Po and at prestigious institutions with money, we will get more clear guidelines. Perhaps next year, in 2 years' time, we'll get more. But at the moment, we have very little. And concerning research, is mostly, as again you were saying with the CNRS example, which is our national agency for research, is mostly about what we cannot do. Etc., what is forbidden, and not guidelines about what we could use, in what ways we should use it, what can be improved in research, fostering groups about what are the dangers, what are the potentialities, the opportunities, etc. So it's very much, again, grassroots. It's like people get involved, and some people in my research center, because many people do quantitative research, so many people are very strongly engaged with AI, much more than me, because my research is very qualitative. But we do have some discussion, but it's not true for other research groups, I think, to the same extent. And I suppose in many French universities there is no not at all any kind of reflection on this, and
Yeah,
not to talk about secondary schools.
Yeah, there's very few reflection on that. Some schools like Sciences Po, they published a set of guidelines, I think a year ago, for Sciences Po, and there's one person working full time on that. But
One per-
I think that also underlines the need to train the teachers and to really engage in public discussion with that. For citing turnitin.com to check for plagiarism, to my knowledge, there's no current technical solution that has a statistically significant way of detecting if content has been generated by AI or not, as there's maybe only, I think, one company that has made its methodology to try detecting these open source, but most of them don't. So I think there's a lot of gaps with that, which really reinforce the need to engage publicly debating with that and creating curricula.
So there's start with creating, say.
Maybe I don't think it's. I think it should be a public enterprise, but yeah.
Thank you.
And I add something. So, as an example, in Intensify also, because I'm quite aware, so we have a guideline of how to use AI. If you look at the option 1, 2, 3, have you used it for, let's say, just to rewrite your statement, or did you even based on it? So now for this year, we have this as a community. 5 minutes for you guys. Now that AI is so good that you can say, you're wrong. Please try it at the human. Because you know to available, now we use something that we can find it, it's human or not. So the way we are going is not the technology. So as somebody said, who knows how to use the technology will be 10x of those who don't. Society moves slowly, but with the reach moves fast. So
Yes.
it's a very common.
The cognitive offloading and calculated conversation. I do think that AI will be valuable for a certain population. I think cognitive offload and actually can even be a net positive for that, but 100% of the society. Because we'll have more mental bandwidth for thinking about other things, but we can use AI to develop. And I'm usually specifically interested in your thoughts because you're working in a startup now and it's AI related, and I'm a young person and I'm interested in AI, and I want to be under the 20% that excels with AI and not the other part. What can I do to learn more about how to use AI in my day-to-day and use it as a critical thing to the tool, rather than something that tells us something.
That's a great question. I think the best way to do it, as we're very early in the development of that technology, and actually the development of real life use cases, is to try it out yourself and see what works or not. And if you can make contribution, like open source contributions to this, and documenting what worked, what didn't work for you, and maybe that will fuel like a whole documentation on the domain. And I think that's our role as technologists and people who are more inclined on AI, and also the education sector, to do this work for teachers, for instance, who don't necessarily have the time to do it, and maybe give them the tools to enact first steps into AI literacy. But we can talk about this later.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, I will close this amazing event. Thank you very much to our speakers. It was great to have you here today. And to our audience, this event was incredible because of your participation. Thank you. Hope to see you soon. And thank you very much for the people that stayed online with us so far. We will send the recording afterwards. Thank you very much. I invite the group here for a picture.
Sur toutes les startups qui proposent des services